Josh Stick.
And I'm Sam Fritchell. Welcome to Star Wars Deep Digging, episode season 1, episode 4, part 1.
Okay, so we're just gonna get back right into it because, once again, if you've been keeping up, you know exactly what is going on. So, let's do it. Han coughed against the smoke and fiery air as he and Chewie turned and ran up the hallway of cells. They nearly collided with Luke, and it wasn't often that Han found himself caught off guard. But standing in front of him, big brown eyes blazing, face bright from the short run she'd just taken, dark hair falling out of ridiculous coils around her ears, was one of the loveliest women Han had ever seen. That face, where had he seen that face? Can't get out that way, he managed when he remembered.
He probably saw that face on propaganda posters. Or maybe on Princess of Alderaan Weekly, the Alderaan Times, or any one of those magazines.
I'm sure we're about to find out. He managed when he remembered they were in danger of being fried into little crispy versions of themselves. The princess's gaze sharpened. Looks like you managed to cut off our only escape route. Her tone was designed to cut, and did. The soft focused dreams in his head evaporated. He turned back to the approaching stormtroopers and fired off another shot. Maybe you'd like it back in your cell, Your Highness. They've known each other for 30 seconds, and they're already the embodiment of a bickering married couple. Shippers must love this. Luke pulled Han and the princess into an alcove behind him. He tugged the comlink transmitter off his utility belt, trying to talk and fire at the same time. C-3PO, C-3PO. Yes, sir. The droid was barely audible over the comlink. We've been cut off. Are there any other ways out of the detention block? What was that? I didn't copy. If the droid responded, Han didn't hear it. His entire focus was on the seemingly endless stream of stormtroopers pushing through the hole in the doors. Chewie fell back even closer to Han, casting a worried look in his direction. If they didn't get going soon, they were going to become permanent residents. Empire Strikes Back reference. Chewie yelped as a laser shot came within millimeters of taking out his nose. There isn't any other way out, Luke called. Of course. I can't hold them off forever, Han yelled. Now what? This is some rescue, the princess said. When you came in here, didn't you have a plan for getting out? Han jerked the thumb back toward Luke. He's the brains, sweetheart. Luke at least looked a little sheepish.
It's usually easier to break in than it is to break out. I remember that lesson from the Star Wars video game Bounty Hunter.
Yeah, prisons tend to work that way. Luke at least looked a little sheepish. Why didn't... Without missing a beat, the princess ripped the blaster rifle out of the kid's hands and spun toward Han. With startling accuracy, she shot out a grate just behind him, sending the scorched metal flying. What are you doing? Han cried. Somebody has to save our skins. You know, funnily enough, okay, in the movie, Han says, what the hell are you doing? Which is actually where I first heard hell as a kid. Got into a bit of trouble for saying that at school. Anyways. Somebody has to save our skins, she shouted, fire in her eyes. She gestured toward the hole she'd created. Into the garbage chute, flyboy. Once again, Han found himself mostly speechless. He had expected tears, grateful kisses maybe, not a tiny wisp of a girl with the bite of an Acklay. Yeah, okay. In case you're curious, Acklay is basically what would happen if you crossed a dinosaur with a praying mantis. Kinda like the thing you'd see in old Ray Harryhausen films. If you ever watched stuff like that. You know, with the crabs and the guys with spears and the Jason and the Argonaut stuff. Anyways. She must have had Vader cowering in fear. The princess fired a shot as she crossed from one side of the hall to the other. She tossed the gun back to Luke and dove into the chutes. Chewbacca dropped back with a pitiful whine after taking a deep whiff of the opening. Get in there, you big furry elf! I don't care what you smell. Han gave him a kick, sending his scope out through the tiny hole. I remember the Lego Star Wars version where Han throws a bone down the chute to convince Chewie to go in after it. And of course, in Darfs and Droids, when they make a joke about it smelling worse than Han's laundry, I am getting so off topic today. Luke ducked to his side of the hall, backing Han up with his rifle. The kid seemed a bit too excited to be seeing, if Han had guessed, his first real firefight. Wonderful girl, Han told him. Either I'm going to kill her or I'm beginning to like her. This is known as belligerent sexual tension. Get in there! Luke threw him an exasperated look, but jumped into the darkness of the opening. Han fired off a few more quick shots to create a cover of smoke, then dove headfirst down the chute. Right into some of the foulest muck and garbage the galaxy had ever seen. Clumps of half-rotted garbage swirled with the waste that was being pumped in from the bathrooms. Sticky flecks of blackened fruit and unidentifiable food clung to battered crates and scrap metal.
Hey look, there's a hoagie down here.
Phineas and Ferb. Han gagged as he came up for air. Grateful he kept his mouth closed as he came down. There was a single light overhead, illuminating just how little there was to see. Chewie had found a small platform leading to a hatch, but was clearly struggling to get it open. The sound of Luke sloshing around, up to his waist in crud, bounced off the impossibly high walls. Here, Leia, Luke said. Let me help you. Leia, huh? Not Princess or Your Highness? Highness, look at the kid, already on a first-name basis with royalty. Too bad she didn't want his help as she climbed up onto some kind of overturned crate. The darkness and damp air made Han feel like they'd landed right in a swamp. The garbage chute was a wonderful idea. What an incredible smell you've discovered, Han said sarcastically.
That's repeated in 2003 Clone Wars when Obi-Wan says to Anakin, "What an incredible smell you've discovered."
It's become a bit of a running gag throughout the franchise. Han said sarcastically. Let's get out of here. Move, Chewie. No, Luke shouted. Wait! But Han had already raised his gun and fired at the hatch. He watched in horror as the bolt bounced off the metal and ricocheted around the compartment. The princess and Luke both dove for cover in the garbage, and Chewie howled in outrage. I already tried it, Aunt, Luke said. It's magnetically sealed. By the way, I don't think the only other time magnetic sealing has come up is in KOTOR 2 when they use it to justify why you can't just use your lightsaber to cut through the doors. The princess...
That's a good reason. Also, that quote, "No, wait," reminds me of another thing from 2003 Clone Wars. "No, wait!" Kills the beast. What?
Well, okay. Characters say no, wait in all sorts of fictions all the time. It's a bit of a loose connection there, but I like where your head's at. I very much like your way of thinking in general. The princess routed on Han, furious. She looked like she wanted to strangle him. Put that thing away, you're going to get us all killed. Han gave a mocking salute. Look, I had everything under control until you let us down here. You know, it's not going to take them long to figure out what happened to us. The girl had the nerve to stick her chin up, looking down her nose at him. It could be worse. As soon as the moans were out of her mouth, an inhuman moan bellowed through the small chamber. Chewie threw himself against the hatch, actually cowering. Surprise, Han said. It's worse. She glared at him. He glared at her. Han was vaguely aware of Luke saying, I think there's something alive in here. Before Han rounded on the princess and muttered, Still waiting on that thank you for rescuing me from my imminent execution. You might be a princess, but you've got less manners than I do. If Han had been standing even 1 centimeter closer to her, he had no doubt the smirk would have been slapped clear off his face. How dare you, Leia said, her voice strained, not just with anger, but with some other emotion that sounded suspiciously like pain. I'm a senator. I was a senator. Even in her anger, real grief shadowed her eyes. The sight momentarily brought Han up short. They had all had a bad day, but hers had clearly been the worst of all. I think something just moved past my leg, Luke said, climbing over a floating pole somewhere behind Han. Congratulations, your worshipfulness, Han said finally. Do you expect me to kiss your hands? Or will a bow and a little groveling suffice? Okay, imagine, when I first read that, I thought Han was saying it to Luke, and that's a funny mental image. Look, did you see that? Luke might have pointed at something, but Han waved him off, his whole attention focused on the little thermal detonator in a white dress. In case you're curious, the thermal detonator is basically just a grenade. Steaming and...
Are we going to do Oh yeah, are we gonna do a whole slideshow on what a thermal detonator is? I guess not, because this just explaining what a thermal detonator is right now is much better than a whole slideshow about what a thermal detonator is, what it does.
And that is a reference to a podcast we listen to. But another story for another day. Steaming and spitting at him like she was about to go off. Like you know anything about manners, you overgrown ape. Apes canonically exist in Star Wars confirmed. Guys, seriously. The anxiety in Luke's voice made Han turn toward him. It's your imagination, kid. Luke let out a hoarse cry as he was violently yanked down into the wasted muck, disappearing from sight. Chapter 13. Han stared at the ripple in the slime-coated water where Luke had been standing no more than a second before. Disbelief held him hostage for a moment, and then, to his surprise, it was fear that exploded out of him. Not only because letting Luke die would probably void his deal with Ben, but because no one, especially not an innocent kid, deserved to drown under scummy Imperial garbage. Han scrambled toward the spot where the kid had gone under. Luke! Luke! Blast it all, he couldn't have lost the kid, not already, not yet, not ever. Luke! Leia screamed, digging under the garbage. The disgusting water sprayed up around them as Luke broke through the surface. A slimy green tentacle was wrapped around his neck, keeping him in a stranglehold. Grab on! Leia said, extending a long silver pole toward him. Shoot it! Luke asked out. My gun's jammed. Where? Han said, trying to aim. Anywhere! Luke screamed. Then he was pulled under again. Han shot down into the muck, hoping against hope he wasn't about to hit the kid's legs. He should have tried grabbing for Luke instead, because once he caught sight of the creature's single bulbous red eye with a slit pupil, he knew exactly what they were dealing with. A Dianoga. Trash monster, garbage squid, they infested city sewers, scavenging for food with their tentacles. Once they found a meal, they wouldn't give it up without a fight. He didn't even want to guess how one ended up on a battle station. They're also apparently quite delicious. Luke! Han shouted, frantically trying to aim. He was a good shot, but he was shooting blind. A metallic clang boomed through his ears, so hard the chamber seemed to shake with it. Han kept his focus on clearing the muck, trying to search for any sign of life. There was a beat of silence.
Maybe the Dianoga is on the Death Star because the Empire thought they needed a compactor for all their trash.
But, that would kind of be redundant with the actual compactor. Or maybe it's Doofenshmirtz's pet. Hey, another Phineas and Ferb reference. Bringing it back. A metallic clang boomed through his ears so hard the chamber seemed to shake with it. Han kept his focus on clearing the muck, trying to search for any sign of life. There was a beat of silence, and then Luke launched himself up through the water again, gasping and coughing. Grab him! Leia called, scrambling over to them. What happened? I don't know, Luke said, still gagging. It just let go of me all of a sudden. And there it was again, the dread creeping over Han. I've got a bad feeling about this, he told the others.
I called it.
Nice. His new life motto, apparently. Hey, meta joke. No force necessary to know for certain. And because he had the worst luck of any life form in the galaxy, two of the opposing walls rumbled and began to push inward. Han's eyes went wide. They were in a trash compactor, and if they didn't get out in the next few minutes, they would be flattened. There's a fan theory that the stormtroopers deliberately turned on the trash compactor in order to kill them, but I don't think that's what George Lucas was going for. Don't just stand there, Leia barked. Try to brace the walls with something. She was still struggling under the weight of a metal beam, trying to wedge it between the walls, pressing closer, closer, closer. Han grabbed one end of the beam, helping her get it into place. The force of the walls bent the thick metal like it was made of plastic. Stick. 3PO! Luke was calling into his comlink. 3PO! Come in, 3PO! Where could he be? This was bad, 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 bad. Chewie jumped down off the platform to help them, but there was nothing strong enough down there to stop the walls. The princess had a sharp tongue, but she was practically pocket-sized compared with the Wookiee, and the more garbage that got pushed toward them, the higher it piled up, threatening to crush her. Han pointed to a stack of crates and bins. Get to the top! I can't, Leia said. Her composure had shattered and panic was creeping in. Han was rattled by the sight of it, and when he tried reaching out to steady her, he slipped and went crashing down into the soggy muck. 3PO! Luke was still yelling. 3PO, will you come in? The walls were close enough now that Han maneuvered so his back was against one side and his feet were pressed against the other. Leia tried to follow suit, but the sopping wet dress tangled around her legs made it almost impossible for her to pull herself up. Her swearing scorched even his ears. I wonder what kind of profanity Leia knows. Easy, easy, he told her when he felt her starting to panic again. His arms strained as he reached down and helped her clamber up next to him. No matter how hard Han braced himself and pushed his legs out, it was like trying to hold back a Star Destroyer. Leia reached out blindly with her hands, and Han seized it. Hey, if he was going to die, at least it would be next to a beautiful girl. Well, one thing's for certain, Han said as his legs were pushed up closer to his chest. We're all going to be a lot thinner. Are you there, sir? C-3PO's voice crackled through the comlink so suddenly.
Oh yeah, talking about profanity that Leia might know, I think it's a bunch of profanity having to do with Alderaan. Well, bunch of profanity normal Alderanians say so, which might be well known throughout the galaxy.
Okay, I gotta chime in. Alderanians do not seem the type to have their own swear words unique to their planet.
Then probably it's a galactic... Then probably it's just regular galactic cursing.
Yeah, shame we don't know the specifics. We're pushed up closer to his chest. We're all going to be a lot thinner. Are you there, sir? C-3PO's voice crackled through the comlinks.
Okay, now I'm imagining Luke, Leia, and Han getting a lot thinner.
Which we actually see in the Lego game. C-3PO's voice crackled through the comlink so suddenly Han was afraid Luke would drop it. Shut down all the garbage mashers on the detention level, Luke yelled into the comm. Do you copy? You know, it's actually impressive that R2 can do that. Hacking. Or slicing, really. It was too late for that. As they pushed together, the walls piled the trash and waste up and up and up until Han could no longer see the ceiling. Metal beams and crates snapped and crumbled, falling onto their heads. He scrambled to keep both himself and the princess climbing, but where could they go? There wasn't any way out.
Gearhead. That's R2-D2's maxed out feat.
KOTOR reference. And the gameplay mechanics this time. Pardon me? The droid sounded confused. Were the walls moving even faster now? Han braced his neck against one wall and walked his feet up the other, willing to try anything to keep them alive even a second longer. It was getting harder to breathe. Small scraps of plastic slipped into the joints of his stormtrooper armor, stabbing into his back and neck. Han had always expected to go down with his ship, blown to bits, and one last burst of glory. Turning into a mashed puddle of goo was not part of the plan. He looked around, searching for something, anything to brace the walls. 3PO, Luke shouted. Shut down all the garbage mashers on the detention level.
Oh yeah, I also thought of this. During the Clone Wars, there was this one astromech droid that was supposed to be a replacement for R2, but that droid kept sabotaging Republic efforts. Turns out that astromech was a spy for the Separatists the whole time.
Okay, once again, Sam, very loose connection there. Very loose. Once again, I love where your head's at. Love it. Absolutely love it. But we have to stay at least a little on topic because we have so much to cover and we don't really have the time for non sequiturs.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Love you, buddy. Love you so much. Turning into a mashed puddle of goo was not part of the plan. He looked around, searching for something, anything to brace the walls. 3PO, Luke shouted. Shut down all the garbage mashers on the detention level. Han struggled to pull himself up that tiny bit more, trying to see if Luke was still okay. The whole room shuddered like a quake, but he was so focused on looking for the kid he initially missed the fact that the walls had stopped moving. The four of them looked at one another, holding their breaths in disbelief. Then Han let out a loud, overjoyed holler that Luke echoed back. Chewie practically crushed the kid in his excited grip, and even the princess let her guard down enough to throw her arms around Han's neck. Curse my metal body, I wasn't fast enough. It's all my fault, my poor master. The droid's voice was still pouring out of the comlink. He was clearly distressed in hearing their cheers as screams. I remember when they did the opposite version of that joke in Droid Tales. 3PO, we're all right, Luke said, laughing. You did great! Can you open the pressure maintenance hatch on unit number? Where are we? He looked around for some kind of label. 326-3827, Han said, pointing to the muck-splattered numbers above the hatch. Well, good on the Empire for labeling their stuff. The click of the hatch depressurizing and opening was one of the sweetest sounds Han had ever heard. He and the others scrambled out into an empty hull. Glancing around as he stripped off the filthy stormtrooper armor, Han took in the plastic sheets and construction signs around them. Good, this section would be deserted. Those aren't in the movie, by the way, so this was clearly just an explanation thrown in by the author about why they weren't immediately surrounded by stormtroopers when they stepped out. If we can just avoid any more of the princess's bright idea, we ought to be able to get out of here, he said. In the original, he said, if we can just avoid any more female advice. Clearly a retcon to avoid implications, shall we say. And just like that, the relief on her face was replaced with a look of utter disdain. I don't know who you are or where you come from, but from now on, you do as I tell you, okay? Han wanted to scoff and brush off her words, but truthfully, the intense way she glared at him was a little scary. Luke hadn't rescued himself a delicate little bloom. Look, your worshipfulness, let's get one thing straight. I take orders from one person, he pointed his chest. Me. It's a wonder you're still alive.
Well, yeah, I got nothing.
Leia spun on her heel, nearly colliding with Chewie. Will someone get this big walking carpet out of my way?
Ah, yes, the big walking carpet. Insults just flow past Chewbacca. I think, mainly because, yeah, Chewbacca has been insulted a lot throughout the franchise, and he doesn't really bat an eye about that.
Still, though, seems kinda out of character for Leia of all people to say that. Isn't she all about saving the Wookiees? Guess some dialogue just hasn't aged well. Han shot an accusatory look at Luke as he stormed ahead of them. No reward is worth this. Luke sighed. Come on. They rushed through the empty hallway, and Han was surprised to see that when it intersected with another long, sleek corridor, he knew where they were. This way, he said, taking them in the opposite direction the princess wanted to head in. She grumbled something under her breath, but followed until they reached a large bay window. Below them, right where they had left her, was the Millennium Falcon. And boy, she had never looked more beautiful, even surrounded by a dozen stormtroopers. 3PO, do you copy? Luke said into his comlink. For the moment, the droid said, we moved to the main hangar across from the ship. We're right above you. Stand by. Leia stepped up next to Han, casting a cool look over the ship. You came in that thing? You're braver than I thought. Nice. Han shot her a dirty look. Come on. He jogged down the hall at the head of the group, rounding the next corner to...
Twice in one day. That's how much the Falcon, the Millennium Falcon, has been insulted.
Oh, I'm sure it isn't even close to the top 1,000 in the record. He jogged down the hall at the head of the group, rounding the next corner to where he thought the elevator should be, and right into a squad of 8 stormtroopers. Okay, so squads are about 8 stormtroopers. Now we know that. It's them, one of the troopers shouted. Blast them! Without sparing a single thought as to how spectacularly stupid the idea was, Han charged forward, firing wildly into the squad and shouting as he went. Despite the odds, the stormtroopers turned and fled, but Han didn't stop. Stormtroopers. All bark, no bite. Chewie roared after him, his heavy steps pounding the ground behind Han. These were the people who had imprisoned Han, his ship, and his best friend on this death trip. These were the people who were ruining his one real shot of getting Jabba off his back and taking control of his life again. His anger pushed him forward like a wave, heating the blood in his veins. Let them try to keep him. Let them try to hold his falcon. To execute the princess hurt the kid? Wait, no, the kid and the princess had nothing to do with it. Right. This attack was about the Falcon. If it also happened to give Luke and Leia an opening to get down to the hangar, then great, but it was revenge, pure and simple. His heart thundering, Han fired his blaster wildly, shouting louder, drowning out every thought in his head.
Just admit it, Han. You care for the boy and the princess.
They are all so cute together. Unfortunately, his courage flamed out the second he reached the end of the hallway, which just so happened to lead into a hangar full of stormtroopers.
He said he wanted to fight more stormtroopers.
Now, this is a good special edition change. especially since it's in the Lego game. Han's boots skidded as he tried to stop himself from crashing into them. Blood draining from his face, he whirled around and started running in the opposite direction as laser bolts chased him back down the hall. Chewie came into view up ahead, clearly confused. Let's go, let's go, Han cried, tugging his companion toward a nearby door. Stairs! It felt like they took the steps 3 at a time, flying down them until they reached the lower level. Han held up a hand, signaling to Chewie to wait as he stuck his hand out of the door at the base of the stairs. The hangar. It was still crawling with stormtroopers, but they made it that far. Han pulled the Wookiee over to a stack of crates and ducked down, keeping an eye out for Leia and Luke. Chewie rumbled out a question, reaching over to smack the back of Han's head. They cut out the close the blast door scene. That was hilarious. I'll admit, I could have used a plan just then, Han whispered. But it turned out fine, right? The longer he stared at his ship, her gray metallic plates gleaming under the harsh hangar lights, the more restless Han felt. What was taking the kids so long? And where was the fossil? Every second they wasted was another missed opportunity to escape. We could go, Han said slowly. Just you and me. It'll be a risk, especially if the old man hasn't disabled the tractor beam. But we could find another job. The Wookiee shook his head, sadness crystallizing in his eyes. Han felt his friend's disappointment as surely as if Chewie had reached over and smacked him again. Chewbacca's next words hit Han like a punch to the chest. It's okay to care about them. They need our help. Han had never let himself get tied too closely to causes. He was fine with the rebellion so long as it created more business for him, and fine with the Empire so long as it kept out of his business. I care about them, Han said. We don't get paid if we bring back bodies. But even as he said it, he was surprised to find the words ringing false in his own ears, to feel an uncomfortable twinge in his chest. Remembering that moment of white-hot fear when the Dianoke had pulled Luke under, and how terror had cracked the princess's tough armor when she thought they'd be crushed. Han couldn't help but acknowledge the quiet feeling that had been sneaking up on him. He did care. They say battle can form unbreakable bonds between soldiers, but Han realized it wasn't the fighting itself. It was that they had worked together, that they had made it through to the other side. In a few hours, he'd come to understand Luke better than he did some of his smuggling buddies he'd known for years. Chewie growled another question, all innocence. He stroked a hand down over Han's head, but the smuggler brushed it off. No, he whispered, pointing at the Wookiee. Dump that thought right now. We aren't going to join up and get ourselves killed for nothing. Join the rebellion? It wasn't so much the idea of the fight that had Han's head pounding. What Chewie was talking about was investing in a cause, making a commitment for their future, being tied to some idea. Chewie crossed his arms over his chest. You're better than this, he said. You really think so? Han asked. Sometimes he didn't feel better than that. Sometimes he felt like the biggest coward on that side of the galaxy. You're right, he admitted. I wouldn't have left them. Han had been called a lot of things in his life. Scum, scoundrel, smuggler, but he wasn't heartless. Chewie's rumbling reply brought a faint smile to his lips. I like the kid too, but unless he wants to come with us, we're splitting with both him and the princess after this. I love how determined Han is to recruit Luke into the crew. That would have made an interesting what-if. We have to get Jabba off our backs, otherwise there is no future for us. A new burst of blaster fire announced Luke and Leia's arrival in the hangar. Han jumped to his feet and ran toward them. Get to the ship, he cried, trying to take out at least a few of the stormtroopers on his way. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught the hangar's floodlights glinting off the droid's metallic skin. They scurried forward toward the Falcon's ramp. Luke, let's go, Han shouted, tugging at the kid's arm. Luke's feet were fixed to the ground, something like shock pouring over his face. He turned to look where Luke pointed to another set of open blast doors. Two figures, one as black and shiny as a smear of oil, the other hooded in a thick brown cloak, circled each other. Their lightsabers vibrated in their hands, as different from each other as their owners were. One was sky blue, the other crimson, like burning blood. The contrasting colors are very beautiful to look at. So that was Darth Vader, huh? And that was terrifying to realize rumors weren't exaggerated. The man-creature thing was a giant towering over the old man. His armor looked thick enough to keep him alive even in the freezing vacuum of space. The lights on his chest panel flickered the way a droid's would. The swords hissed and sizzled as they clashed. Ben and Darth Vader danced around each other like seasoned fighters lost in their own world. Han realized he was staring as hard as the kid and tried again to tug him back toward the ship. The stormtroopers who had chased Luke and Leia into the hangar had turned their attention to the sword fight. Ben looked over, the troopers' approach catching his attention. Then he looked past them, to where Luke was standing dumbstruck. To Han, Han couldn't be sure.
Seasoned fighters, huh? Well, you don't... Yeah, well, you don't know the half of it.
57 years Obi-Wan has been alive, all preparing for this moment. I mean, leading up to this moment. Obviously, he didn't know this was going to happen. Han couldn't be sure. The old man was just too far away, but he thought Ben might have given him a nod just before he turned back to face Darth Vader. Ben drew his blade in and made no effort to stop Vader's lightsaber from slashing through him, but instead of his body falling to pieces, an empty cloak fell to the ground. It was like the old man had just disappeared. One last magic trick. Han shook his head, the hair on the back of his neck rising.
Magic.
Maybe not magic at all. No! Luke yelled. Han hooked an arm across the kid's chest and started to drag him away. For a second, he really thought the kid might make a run for Vader. Luke's anger and disbelief rolled off him. "Luke, we have to get out of here," Leia shouted from the bottom of the ramp. The stormtroopers opened fire on her, forcing her to duck and run into the safety of the ship. Luke spun around one last time and fired a shot, not at Darth Vader but at the controls to the blast doors. They slammed shut just as Vader and the stormtroopers began to charge toward them. No, I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to question that whenever the controls are blasted, they always shut the door. No, I'm above that. I possess willing suspension of disbelief. I possess that. "We have to go, kid," Han told him, "before they fix the tractor beam." That snapped Luke out of his daze long enough for them to board the Falcon. Han raced toward the cockpits, where Chewie was already revving up the engine. He didn't realize Luke hadn't followed him in until he looked back over his shoulder through the door and saw the princess comforting him. Han punched the controls, and they had hit open space before he took his next breath. "All right, Chewie," he said as TIE fighters roared toward them in the distance. "Only 4. He reached up, stroking his ship affectionately. She might have taken a knocking, but she would never let him down where it counted. "We're coming up on the sentry ships. Hold them off as long as you can. Angle the deflector shields while I charge up the main guns." Chewie roared his agreement, reaching out to flip through the switches. Han left his seat so fast it spun behind him. For the longest time, if anyone asked Han why he was traveling alone, he'd give them the same line. The name says it all. Solo. Do not. That wasn't canon. That never happens. Han is descended from a long line of noble solos, stretching out back tens of thousands of years. That scene is not canon.
All right, then. I was just going to ask about what a man's solo was.
Okay. Yeah, we got to get around to that book, too, because, oh man, the song. Work on your singing voice. We are doing that. And then he'd met Chewie, and suddenly that didn't apply anymore. The Wookiee knew, even if Han couldn't admit it to himself, that what scared Han wasn't putting his heart into a cause that would fail. It was losing the individuals he opened his heart to. He wasn't free. Not yet. Not until he dealt with Jabba and repaid his debt. Even after, he'd never be like Luke. He wasn't meant to be a hero. But I was beginning to suspect that he wasn't meant to be just a petty smuggler either. The new friends he'd made had shown him that much. The old man would laugh if he knew Han was thinking it, but it was some strange stroke of luck. Destiny. Ben would say that it brought their little group together. He ran toward the central hold to rally Luke to head to the gun ports, already imagining the weight of the ship's large blaster as it swung around and he took aim. Han knew losing themselves in another flight would be the best way for both him and the kid to turn off the sting of being forced to stand by helplessly as Ben was cut down. The old man had sacrificed himself to save them, and it had taken seeing that for Han to question what would have happened if their situations had been reversed, and he'd been the one in the position to make a sacrifice. Would he have done it? He wanted to believe that yes, he would have. Sacrificing his life to buy time for others? Force Unleashed 2 Ultimate Sith Edition, anyone? The thought made his chest feel tight. How incredible that, of all people, it was the old man who had upended his universe. Made him see the truth about himself with one selfless act of courage. Han wasn't the best guy in the galaxy, nor the smartest or even the most honest, and he wasn't sure he knew what he had done to deserve these friends. But for now, it was enough he wasn't flying solo anymore.
If I had $1 every time a main character sacrificed their life to buy time for others, well, let's just say it has become more and more common.
Oh, It most definitely has. Alright, we are back. We are into our last third. 100 pages to go. Chapter 14. I can't believe he's gone. Those were the only words running through Luke's head, caught in some horrible loop as the ship lurched into space. I can't believe he's gone. He slumped onto the bench by the game board on the Millennium Falcon, his legs finally giving out under him. Luke couldn't bring himself to move. He couldn't close his eyes, either, not without seeing the way Bandit looked just before. He's dead, Luke thought. Why can't I say it? Why did he have to keep seeing the way Bandit deactivated his lightsaber and hadn't tried to stop him? Darth Vader. The name hissed through Luke's mind like smoke, making the hairs on the back of his arms rise. Just seeing the man, the thing, had been enough to make Luke feel as if he were drenched in ice. The shock had left Luke useless as a droid with its circuits fried. That was after Bandit told him that Vader had killed his father. Vader had now taken another person from him. Luke gripped the edge of the game board so hard he was sure the surface would crack. There was no one, nothing, in the galaxy he hated more than Darth Vader. He felt himself begin to shake, tears again threatening to spill over. Luke stubbornly scrubbed at his face. What good would crying do? Even as the fury pounded through him, its flames were doused by poisonous fear every time he pictured the stark lines of the monster's mask. What had Ben called him? That's right, a Sith. One who relied on the dark side of the Force instead of embracing the light. Ben had promised that the Force had a plan for everything, that had guided their course through life. But how could the Force have let that happen? Why did evil have to win and win and win again? Luke knew he was supposed to trust in it, but mostly all he felt was hopeless. Vader had beaten Ben, a legendary warrior, a Jedi Master. What would happen if Luke ever came face to face with the Sith? If he hunted Luke down, looking for the droids, looking for the princess? Luke had had a few hours of training. Ben had had decades. And still, Vader had cut the Jedi Master down with a single blow, leaving nothing. What Luke's forgetting is that Vader's had decades of training too. Because, as impossible as it seemed, at the moment the black-armored warrior had sliced his crimson lightsaber through Ben, the Jedi Master had disappeared. Vanished. Why? And Luke shook his head. He had to have imagined it. But he could have sworn that in the seconds after he felt his heart stop and before Han had grabbed him, he had heard Ben's voice inside his mind. Run, Luke, run! But that was insane, wasn't it? That kind of thing just didn't happen. Ben would have been speaking to him as a spirit? Okay, Luke, skepticism's kind of arbitrary. You've seen Ben influence minds, toss things around without touching them. You're drawing the line at ghosts. Really? The shiver that crawled over his skin was chased away by the
To be honest, I've seen many unnatural things in the galaxy, and I would say so unnatural that I'd believe anything.
As would I. Over his skin was chased away by the poncho someone draped over his shoulders right then. Ah, Luke's canonically member of Poncho Gang.
Poncho pals.
Luke looked up from where he'd rested his face against his arm to find Leia watching him. The person he saw was an entirely different Leia from the haughty princess who had taken one look at him after he opened her cell and said, "Aren't you a little short for a stormtrooper?" She was a different Leia from the one who'd blasted out the garbage chute and the one who'd thrown her arms around him in relief when they'd gotten out. He liked that about her. She wasn't at all what he had expected. He was a little ashamed, actually, to admit that he'd really thought the princess would swoon in relief at the sight of him coming to save her. You know, probably a good thing that she didn't. But we'll get to that later. She'd rescued them from her own rescue. Luke heaved out a sigh, gratefully accepting the poncho. He wanted to say something, even just thank you, but every word seemed to catch in his throat. There wasn't anything you could have done. Still, I'm so sorry, she said, kneeling down next to him. That was General Kenobi, wasn't it? From what my father told me of him, he was a great man. Luke nodded, numbness settling into the center. He'd known Ben for only a day, yet even he'd been able to tell that Ben was a great man. Okay, that has been thoroughly retconned, but also it doesn't make any sense. Like, in order for this timeline to fit, the events of the movie have to take place over the course of, well, a lot longer than just a day, because, you know, Biggs Darklighter and his little adventures. There's, like, assuming hyperspace travel takes more than a few hours, I don't know, maybe a few weeks, possibly months.
I see what you're getting at. Yeah, Luke Skywalker knew Ben for much more than just a day.
And that's not even taking into account his childhood, in which he ran into Ben tons of times. Anyways. And yet even he had been able to see that Ben was a great man. But there was still so much about the Jedi that he didn't know. And he hadn't actually given Luke any details about his life, not really. Something about that made Luke feel betrayed, and it brought his anger back up to a simmer beneath his skin. I followed you, Luke thought, surprised at the flash of rage that sliced through him. I lost everything and followed you. You promised that you'd teach me, Ben. And now, what? How would he teach himself? The lightsaber clipped to his belt felt cold and heavy. Guilt and fear.
Yeah, well, Luke's gonna find that out through a very long journey in the future.
One we will get to very soon. Well, okay, not that soon, but here's our farm boy. Guilt and fear sat in his stomach, knocking its contents around, making him feel sick. You must learn to control your emotions, otherwise they will control you. Ben had told him that when Luke was training with his lightsaber. All these things he was feeling now were tied to the dark side of the Force. Luke hadn't understood at the time how that was possible, but now he saw how easy it would be to sink into his own helpless fury, to get lost and never come out of it. Yeah, Force users are kind of cursed because, you know, they feel anything and they just go insane with that emotion. It's not good for them. Blasted, what am I doing? Luke said, sitting up. You just lost your whole planet. Loss is still loss, Leia said, her voice tight. She glanced away. We just can't let it beat us. We have things to do. How are you so okay? He asked. I feel like in the past day, I've lost my only family and now Ben. I've never been off my home world before, and now I'm a million kilometers away from it. It's like I've been knocked out of orbit and I don't know how to get right side up again. How do you do it? A wave of pain crossed Leia's face. She bit her lip, drawing in a deep breath. I want to cry, she admitted, all the time, every moment. But I know that if I start, I won't be able to stop, and that's not useful right now. Plus, it would really hurt the movie's pacing to give the characters a chance to grieve. We have no time for our sorrows, Commander, and all that. Our situations aren't the same, but I do know what you're feeling right now. What it's like to feel alone. Even though you're surrounded by strangers, Luke finished for her. Exactly, Leia said, squeezing his arm. The expression on her face was still so heartbroken. Luke wanted to do something, anything to make her feel better. But even he knew that was impossible. She did understand. And so did he. You were the one who found the droids, right? Luke looked up at the sudden question. Yeah, we bought them off Jawas, these desert scavengers, to work on my uncle's farm. I found your message on the little guy while I was trying to clean him. And you went off to find General Kenobi because of it? Leia asked. Well... Luke rubbed the back of his neck, still a little embarrassed about being outsmarted by an asteroid droid. R2 ran away to find him. 3PO and I found him, and then Ben found us just as we were being attacked by sand people. Saved us all. While I was gone, stormtroopers came to the farm looking for the droids and killed Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru when they didn't find them. Leia pulled back, looking stricken. Luke, I can't even begin to tell you how sorry I am. All of this, it's all because of me. I was so desperate to get the plans to General Kenobi. I wasn't even thinking... No, Leia, Luke said, resting his hands on her shoulders. The only people responsible for my family and Ben's death are the Empire. Vader. I wish it didn't have to happen the way it did, but they didn't die for nothing. Getting the information you found to the rebellion is all that matters now. Leia looked down, rolling her shoulders back as she took in another steady breath. Can I ask you something? Yeah, of course. She smoothed out the wrinkles in the fabric of her dress, running her fingers along the watery lines of the new stains. Why did you rescue me? Why wouldn't I have? Luke asked, confused. Was he just supposed to leave her there for the Empire to execute? You could have left once the tractor beam was disabled. I'm sure that's the plan our friend the captain was pulling for. You didn't have to risk being caught. General Kenobi could have brought the information to the rebellion. Luke was almost... Yeah, I get why Leia would think that a Jedi would be a better asset than her. Luke was almost offended that she would think he was capable of just walking away. Because you needed help. That's why. You don't need a reason to help people. Leia looked at... Why do I feel like I've heard that before? Leia looked up at that, and Luke saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Her face seemed alive with color again. You asked before about how I hold it together? Luke nodded. You needed some way to keep going without constantly falling back on his anger. He couldn't disrespect Ben's memory by ignoring what the Jedi had tried to teach him. He needed a way out of his cycle of hatred, and Leia seemed to have found one.
Well, let's see. Well, there was the idea that they could have just brought the plans to the rebellion and General Kenobi deliver the plans himself, but then again, it'd be better to rescue Leia and do this current mission rather than just skip it.
Yeah, plus, they wouldn't have gotten a second chance. Leia was super dead if they didn't step in. I think about when I was very young, running wild through the palace playing hide and seek with my mother and father. She uttered a faint laugh, smiling at the memory. They were both so busy and important. They had the weight of the universe on their shoulders, but they still had this great, huge capacity for fun and love and hope. They never gave up on the idea that the galaxy could be a safe, beautiful place for all life. Joining the rebellion finally let me have a real real way to fight for the changes I believed in. Now, fighting alongside them will be my way of honoring my parents and my people. It gives me a reason to push through and keep going. And maybe it'll be the same for you. Luke had run through such a range of emotions over the previous few days. Horror at the loss of his family, the exhilaration of finally flying in space, the frustration of training, the terror of being shot at and trying to outrun and outgun the Empire. But in Leia's words, he felt something new. Hope. Yeah, he said slowly. I think I'd like that. And when Leia offered him a tentative smile, he was finally able to return it. At that moment, Han burst into the central hold area, face flushed and hair wild. Come on, buddy, he said. We're not out of this yet. I need your help. You keep saying you can fly and shoot. Well, now's the time to prove it. Luke was exhausted, wrung out by the day, but that sounded right up his alley. He passed the poncho back to Leia with a grateful look and said to Han, Show me where.
I just thought of this. Han says to Luke, you say you could fly and shoot, right? Luke says, yes. Hoping that he gets the chance to fly the Falcon. Then Han says, great, I'll fly, you shoot.
Yes. Han grinned, slapping Luke's back. Luke followed him through the ship at a run to a ladder well at the center of the ship. At each end of the ladder was a gun port. Just aim and fire, and try to keep up with me if you can. A trill of excitement finally found its way into Luke as he slid down the ladder. He'd seen from the outside of the ship that there were two long gun turrets, one on the top of the ship, the other below. We'll see about that. Luke hogged up into the seat behind the gun and picked up the headset hooked over it. You in, kid? Han's voice came through the headphones. Yeah, I read, Luke said. He relaxed just a little bit when he saw the actual controls. Well, he had a viewport window to look through. There was also a target screen. Dozens of...
Shooting down TIE fighters from a gun turret. That would make an excellent minigame.
Yeah, there are so many video games where you can do this kind of thing. And one of them is one of our personal favorites. Well, two of them technically, but they're both basically the same game. Well, he had a viewport window to look through. There was also a target screen. Dozens of red blips were swarming toward the green one that represented the Falcon. Okay, so dozens, not just 4 TIE fighters. He seized control of the laser gun's handles and swung the heavy thing around on its stance. Still, this was going to be a lot different from shooting womp rats in Beggar's Canyon. Even he knew that. But he wasn't about to let Han or the others down. Luke moved his thumbs over the firing buttons, ready. Okay, stay sharp, Han said. Leia must have gone into the cockpit with Chewbacca because her voice filtered into his ears next. Here they come! He heard the TIE fighters before he saw them streak past the viewport like shooting stars. The sound was piercing as if the ship's engines were screaming. Ack! Despite how calm he felt, Luke jumped at the sudden sound, his thumbs hitting the firing buttons. Yikes. He forced himself to stop choking the controls and take actual aim before beginning to fire again. The gun sprayed out a line of laser beams, chasing the ships across the sky and back again without a single hit. The Millennium Falcon bucked like an angry dewback. Okay, in case anyone's curious, a dewback is... It's a dinosaur. It's just a dinosaur. You can ride it, actually. As it took the TIE fighter's fire. Luke was sure he smelled smoke, but kept that bit of information to himself as another 3 Imperial ships appeared. When they hit the Falcon again, Luke was nearly thrown out of his seat. "They're coming in too fast," he said between gritted teeth. Sweat made his hair stick to his face. His tunic hung his back. The sound of an explosion somewhere overhead and a cheer from Han was the only response Luke got. So he had hit one. Luke set his shoulders, focusing on the ships again. He wasn't going to let Han get all the glory. "We've lost lateral controls," Leia reported. "Don't worry, she'll hold together," Han said, but he forgot to mute himself when he added, under his breath, "Hear me, baby, hold together." Somehow Luke felt himself relaxing into the fight. It wasn't all that different from the way he'd felt handling his lightsaber. His racing heart settled into a steady rhythm. "I'm doing this," he thought. "Really doing it." He was anticipating which direction the gleaming black and silver TIE fighters would come from, their evasive maneuvers, until finally, the explosion of fiery dust from the destroyed Imperial ship momentarily blinded Luke. The thrill of victory raced through him, lifting him higher than he had thought possible. He pumped a fist in the air. "I got him! I got him! Great kid," Han said as he hit another TIE fighter, sending it spiraling into space like a smoking comet. "Don't get cocky." It didn't even bother Luke any more that Han, who couldn't have been more than 10 years older than Luke, would not stop calling him kid. It had set Luke's teeth on edge the first few times, mostly because it had reinforced everything Luke had hated about his life on Tatooine. He had felt as if he were never going to grow up, never going to move on, as if he'd always be living out in the deep desert with his aunt and uncle and a group of friends at Anchorhead. He wasn't totally sure he even liked him. Because seriously, who gave someone they liked the nickname Wormy? Yeah, that was actually in the original Marvel Comics from 1977. That's what Luke's friends called him.
Also, kids can be cruel.
Oh, come on. They're all like 19 at this point. Luke had applied for the Imperial Academy a few months before, hoping that would be the year Uncle Owen stopped acting like Luke was crucial to running their little moisture farm and let him go. There are moments Luke had really believed he would never break through the sunset colors of Tatooine's atmosphere. Now the thought of it just made Luke grin, because even as a kid, he and his best friend Biggs had flown through the craggy teeth of Beggar's Canyon in their T-16 Skyhoppers. And that's another radio drama reference. I think it's the last one in the book. He clipped his ship's wings so many times, but it was a wonder he was still alive. But he hadn't stopped, not until he could hit the most womp rats as the hairy, monstrous little pets scurried through the canyon ravines and washes. Not until he had the fastest time flying through. This kid was more than happy to show the captain up, and do it in Ben's honor. Luke destroyed the next 2 TIE fighters that had the misfortune of landing on his target screen. I'm in space, he thought over and over again. I'm doing it.
Well, I was just gonna say that's a different experience than it's a different experience than some other kid would have had. That other kid would have said, "I'm in space and I'm about to die."
And it was more like, "I'm in space and I'm about to die." But yeah, thank you for remembering.
Yeah, that's more accurate, actually.
Yep. And still, even watching the Imperial ships blow apart, he couldn't believe it. He couldn't wrap his mind around how much his life had changed in hours, never mind days, weeks, years. Luke was shocked he didn't have whiplash. "There's still 2 more of them out there," Leia said. "On it," Luke called. "Not if I get there first." It sounded like he was having just as much fun as Luke was. Swinging his chair around again, Luke kept his thumbs on the firing buttons. The gun vibrated his hands as he took careful aim at the TIE fighter trying to strike at the Falcon from below. With a deep breath, he turned the laser onto the Imperial ship and watched, practically jumping out of his seat in excitement when it blew apart. The last enemy dot on the radar disappeared as Han took out the remaining TIE fighter. The Falcon rumbled with the aftershock of the final explosion. And then they were all clear. A relieved laugh burst out of Luke. "We did it! We did it!" He stood up from the gun port so fast he was yanked back down by the cord of his headset. I think it's kind of weird that they don't have cordless headset. 1977. Back when people still thought sci-fi universes would have data tapes. Untangling himself from the wire, he threw the headset down and climbed up the ladder just as Han was climbing down his. The smuggler clasped Luke's shoulder, grinning. Nice shooting, kid. They teach you that out on the moisture farm? Luke shook his head, his energy deflating. Han hadn't meant it as an insult. At least Luke didn't think he had, but the word still stung. He wasn't just some farm kid. He'd always wanted to be something more than that. They passed by Chewbacca, who was busy fishing 3PO.
I don't think he learned that on the moisture farm. He just focused, trusted his instincts, and bam.
They passed by Chewbacca, who was busy fishing C-3PO out from where he'd fallen into a compartment that must have flown open. R2 beeped at Chewie's side, urging him on. It's terrible, isn't it? I'm maimed! 3PO's voice faded as they entered the cockpit. Not a bad bit of rescuing, huh? Han said, throwing his gloves onto the nearest seat. Luke trailed behind him, taking in the sight of Leia standing up from the pilot's seat and moving to one of the two in the back. Sometimes I even amaze myself. Leia leveled a look of utter contempt at Han. That doesn't sound too hard. Luke's heart lightened a bit at that. At least he wouldn't have to compete with Han for Leia's attention. His Uncle Owen had once explained some creatures were just natural enemies. He couldn't leave the two of them alone, not because he was afraid the smuggler would put the moves on Leia, but because he was genuinely worried they would eventually try clawing each other's faces off. Besides, Leia continued, raising her chin, they let us go. It's the only explanation for the ease of our escape. Easy, Han repeated in disbelief as he slumped into the pilot's seat. You call that easy? They must be tracking us, hoping we lead them back to the rebellion. And Luke's blood slowed in his veins at that. He hadn't even considered it as a possibility. Maybe he really was just a dumb farm kid in need of a good hard reality check. Not this ship, sister, Han said, lacing his knees behind his head, all confidence. Luke could tell by the way she was struggling to control not only her expression but also her tone that Leia was frustrated. At least the information in R2 was safe, she said. What's so important? What's he carrying?
I remember the first time a tracking beacon was used. It was a very, very, very long time ago. Way, way back during the years of the Old Republic.
Oh yeah, they basically had the same tech for thousands of years. Eventually stuff gets so advanced that you really can't go any farther than that. You're just kind of stuck doing the same things forever. So sad. The technical readouts of that battle station, she replied. What? Luke said, almost leaping out of his seat in shock.
Let's just say the first time I remember a tracking beacon was used was a smuggler ship came back to the Republic. They seemed nice. It was great. But then an entire fleet followed that ship back into Republic space. And so began the Great Hyperspace War.
Hyperspace explorers, not smugglers. That's why it was called the Great Hyperspace War. He would never have let the R2 unit out of his sight if he'd known. He wasn't sure what he had thought the information vital to the survival of the rebellion she mentioned in her message was, but it hadn't been that. I'm surprised R2 didn't mention it. I only hope that when the data is analyzed, a weakness can be found in the battle station's defenses.
Let's just say there's a lot of things R2 didn't mention.
Yeah. He knows so much, but says very little. There has to be a way to destroy it, Leia said. We still have a chance. This isn't over yet. Han suddenly looked like a wild animal that had been backed into a corner. It is for me. I ain't in this for your revolution, and I expect to be well paid for my trouble. Luke knew that his new friend wasn't exactly noble and would never claim to be, but really? Disappointment thundered through him. Luke shook his head. After all that, it still boiled down to money? He couldn't have misread the guy that badly, could he? I have my own problems to deal with, Han muttered, looking back out toward the stars. Leia had been caught off guard by his response. If Luke had thought she was angry before, it was nothing compared with now. Her voice was colder than the freezing vacuum of space. You needn't worry about your reward. If money is all that you love, then that's what you'll receive. That was the problem, wasn't it? Luke knew Han loved his credits, but that wasn't all he loved. Luke had seen some real good in him. Or, at least the potential for good when he wasn't distracted by thoughts of his bank accounts. Han's smirk slipped just for a moment as Leia turned and started toward the cockpit door.
Here's something. Once Han stops thinking about credits, he'll do the right thing.
Yep. Your friend is quite a mercenary, she said to Luke, loudly enough to ensure that Han would hear. I wonder if he really cares about anything. Or anyone. I care, Luke called after her lamely. Smooth, kid, Han said with a chuckle. Luke flushed as he took Chewbacca's empty co-pilot chair. He could count the number of girls his age he'd known on Tatooine with one hand, and all of them had been taken. It was hard enough to figure out what to say to a girl without her also being one of the most impressive people in the entire galaxy. Luke asked, trying to sound casual, "What do you think of her?" Han raised an eyebrow. "I'm trying not to, kid." "Good," Luke muttered under his breath. "Still, she's got a lot of spirit," Han said. "I don't know, do you think a princess and a guy like me?" "No." Luke realized his mistake when he looked up from under his bangs and saw the teasing smile on Han's face. The smuggler was still laughing as he pushed the lever in front of him forward, sending the ship hurtling into hyperspace. Alright, I think that's a good place to stop for today.
It's a really good place to stop. We're on to the next chapter.
Yep. Alright, we'll probably do another one tomorrow.
Yeah.
Alright, and we will see you then.